Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
So we're with Marissa Burt, and we're talking part two, an extension of our conversation. Can you tell us the title of your book again?
Sure. It is The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families.
How False Promises Betrayed. Okay, and so at this point, I want to go deeper, and you can go ahead and name some names. Let's discuss, because I like philosophy. I think that way, but I also like very concrete, practical examples. So if we can do that, let me pull off a name or two, and you can maybe tell me what kind of myths you're talking about. How about if I use the name Bill Gothard?
Bill Gothard, yes. Okay. So for those listening, probably are familiar with him. He started the Institute of Basic Life Principles, the ATI homeschooling curriculum, was hugely influential in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even to today. So yes, he built a Christian parenting empire. Bill Gothard, so in the 70s, so many things were happening around the same time. But when I think of Bill Gothard and James Dobson and Jay Adams kind of together, others like John MacArthur, others are happening around the same time. But I think of those three names as related in certain ways because they all began to suggest that there were biblical ideas for family life in very specific ways. I think Bill Gothard probably went all in on this idea that the Bible is almost like a user manual and like an appliance guide for children. I think he maybe even uses those terms at one point in his writing.
So in a sense, maybe that's not bad, but if you're off somewhat in your theology, it could be bad. So how was he off in his theology?
Well, that's a big question. I would say for his family life teaching in particular, where he goes wrong early on is this lens of the Bible almost as a magic book that you're going to find. It's a little bit Gnostic even, of like you're going to find some secret wisdom for your life that's going to give you success, worldly success. Sometimes he talked about financial success, but also will prevent evil from coming into your life. And he comes up with the umbrella of protection, which has the hierarchy in the home. But the idea is if you stay under that umbrella, you will be protected. And it's not just the umbrella of Jesus or something like you are in Christ. It's the umbrella of, no, you stay in your order in the home, which is pastor, husband, wife, and then children down at the bottom here. And so if children step out from under that umbrella in any way, and that could be disobeying parents, but it could be the made up rules he made up, like girls wearing pants or something like this. If you step out from under that, you are vulnerable to bad things happening, to Satan's attacks. So it also came with this distorted theodicy or understanding of suffering. So if anything bad happened to you, it was because you disobeyed, which really reduces Christianity to a kind of, I think, pagan understanding of God that would say, oh, you have to placate God to secure good for yourself. And if you don't, bad things happen. And this is really out of alignment with the gospel. It's out of step with the gospel, but it kind of permeated his teaching, and he created a number of resources that kind of took this into very detailed ways. And interestingly enough, he was never married. He never had children of his own. So it's a little bit mysterious why people were so drawn to his authoritative way of saying, like, this is God's plan for you and your family. But they really were.
He had good diagrams.
Yeah, it must have been. Well, and he sold out stadiums, right? He sold out stadiums in the 70s and 80s.
But he had his PowerPoint, he had his diagrams. Yeah. So is he one of the people that got this wrong? I've heard this said, that the husband is the prophet, priest, and king. Which it's not biblical.
Right. But it shows up everywhere. I mean, I would not be surprised I'm sure he said something like that. I don't know if that's a direct quote. Yeah, I've heard similar from Elizabeth Elliot's stuff. She talked a lot about the husband and father as priest in the home. A lot of the resources talk about that. I've heard similar from Mark Driscoll, believe it or not, a number of people. But yeah, I think this idea that husbands operated in that way shows up in a lot of these resources.
There is a belief, what people call it, the order of creation.
Yes.
And they say that, the man is here and the woman is not there. The woman is under here.
Mm-hmm.
And as my wife, Dr. Joy Fleming, did her work on Genesis 2 and 3, and then I did my work on 1 Timothy 2 and 3, we discovered, you may be putting labels on something that is talking about something else.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I'd like just to mention this. So in Genesis chapter 3, when the serpent tempter comes in and he talks with plural pronouns, so he says, you two, you guys, you both. And later on, when the woman gives the fruit to the man who was with her, okay, so they're both there at the tree. The question is, what's happening here? And so some people say, well, the man was in charge and, the woman took charge and all this kind of stuff. But what's happening is that when God comes and asks him, what did you do? What did you do? The woman says, the serpent deceived me and I ate. And that's mentioned in the New Testament. The serpent deceived her and she ate. Well, later on, when the people of Israel come into the promised land, God says, I want you to set up 6 special cities of refuge. And I thought to myself when I first learned that, what's that for? Well, the cities of refuge were for the case of when you kill somebody, and if you do it on purpose, then there is an avenger who's supposed to come and put you to death. So if you kill somebody, then you have first-degree murder, you're guilty of that, and the punishment is capital punishment. But what if you killed somebody and it wasn't on purpose? Well, you still killed somebody, and the avenger still says, I'm going to go after you. And God says, I've got these 6 cities of refuge, 3 on each side of the Jordan River, wherever the people of Israel are, and they can get there pretty quick. And so these people who did not murder on purpose, they're second-degree murder, second-degree, what's it called, manslaughter. So they get to go to the city of refuge, and those people check them out, and they say, oh, yeah, you didn't do it on purpose. We will protect you from the avenger. And eventually, when the Jubilee year comes, you'll set free. So there are 2 levels of punishment: first-degree murderer, first-degree killing somebody on purpose. Then you have the capital punishment. Second degree, there's a lower level of punishment. Both situations, there's somebody who died, but the intent of the heart is judged differently. Okay, so now we have 2 people at the tree, and Satan says, join me, I'm a rebel, I don't like God, I'm setting myself up as God, you follow me, you become God, you make your own decisions, don't follow God. And the woman, she didn't act as a first-degree eater, she was a second-degree eater. She was deceived, and so then she ate, and when she realized what had happened, she confessed to God and points out the perpetrator that led her into that disobedience. The man doesn't talk about the serpent. He could have, and he hides that, and he blames. He says, the woman whom you put to be here with me, it's you guys. He's doing the blaming. Now, here's the problem. A lot of people say, oh, they're both blaming. The woman is blaming and the man is blaming. No, the man is blaming and the woman is pointing out her attacker. There's a difference.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
So the punishment for their sin is, in the day you eat thereof, you will die. They died. We're all dying. We understand that punishment. But then what does God say for the way that they sinned? The way that he sinned, and by the way, the serpent tempter rebelled. And so God says to the serpent tempter, cursed is. So there's a curse on the serpent. And then he says to the man, cursed is the ground. Ooh. So he doesn't curse the man himself, could have. Instead, in grace, he diverts that to the ground. But there's a curse because of the serpent's rebellion, and there's a curse because of the first-degree rebellion of the man. He rebelled on purpose. But for the woman, there's no curse. There's a pattern of 6 things that God says to the serpent tempter. Because you cursed is all the days of your life, there's 6 things in the Hebrew pattern of the text. In Genesis 3:14-15. And then when God speaks to the man, 17-19, the same 6 pattern. Cursed is because you, all the days of your life. But when he speaks to the woman, none of those 6 elements are there. It's
Oh,
very
interesting.
different. Not at all. So here's what's going on. It's not an order of creation.
Mm.
It's an order of disobedience.
Mm.
She was a second degree, we'll say second degree eater,
Mhm.
and he was a first degree eater.
Mm.
And God uses that to teach them, why he's responding the way he does.
Mm.
And so when he talks to the woman, he's not cursing her. He takes action in 3:16a. He says, I'm going to do two things. Uh, I'm going to multiply. I'm certainly going to do this. You're going to have the experience of sorrowful toil because the
Mm.
ground's going to be cursed, and that's going to be rough for you.
Mm.
And then the man, when the ground is cursed, that's going to be rough for him. So I'm going to multiply your sorrowful toil and your conception. Oh, wait a minute. That is a
Mm.
fulfillment of the promise. When God said to this, threaten the serpent, her
Mm.
seed will crush your head. God turns to her and says, by the way, I'm going to confirm to you that you
Mm.
will have that offspring. You will have that seed.
Mm.
So this is really, really a wonderful, gracious beginning of Genesis 3:16. I'm going to take action in two ways. And then he says, now I'm going to teach you what's coming up. You're going to have grief as you raise
Mm.
these children.
Mm.
Your desire in your heart is still good. You're on your honeymoon in the Garden of Eden, bed and breakfast. You still have this good desire for him, but his desire has changed, and he
Mm.
desires he's not having me rule over him anymore. In a sense, the serpent tempter is ruling over him. For sure, he's ruling over himself, and he wants to also rule
It's
over
true.
you. So if you want to
Mm.
talk about any kind of a strange umbrella,
Yeah.
make it change the diagram. It's a new idea for me now. Make a
Mm.
cloud.
Mm.
Who's clouding this up? But God didn't say to the man, go rule over her. He says to the woman,
Right.
his desire is to rule over you.
Mm.
See the bad stuff that's
Yeah.
going on. Now, if you don't see that, and most people somehow don't, somehow they
Mm.
miss this. They say, oh, she was cursed, he was cursed, Satan was cursed, the ground was cursed, more was cursed. In the Babylonian Talmud, the
Mm.
Jews outside of Israel said that there were 10 curses on
Mm.
Eve. And
Mm.
all of that kind of missed theology comes down and has gone through Christian theology as
Yeah.
well, has warped things. And so
Yeah.
now these people who are trying to help us out, trying to teach, they're influenced by that missed
Yes. Mm-hmm.
interpretation, and then they teach us the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we talked a little bit about
Oh yeah, that's all
Gothard,
good.
and I
Mm.
remember some of these others you're talking about. But let's shift to who's this Doug Wilson? What's going on with him?
Yeah, so Doug Wilson, just a couple weeks ago, CNN interviewed him. So he made headlines recently. He is a self-described Christian nationalist, but he's been around forever since his father planted churches in Moscow, Idaho in, I want to say, probably the 50s and 60s. And he kind of inherited that. He became a pastor out there and became a prominent figure in the Christian homeschooling movement, particularly the classical Christian education movement,
Okay, wait a
and
minute.
became a,
Wait a
oh,
minute. So now, if a parent is trying to figure out where do I send my kids to school,
mhm,
and there's a homeschool association, a 2 day a week or something, and
yeah.
they tell you this is a classical, is that Doug Wilson kind of philosophy?
It could be. So it should, I mean, I've homeschooled on and off over the years. So I will tell other homeschooling families uh, often are introduced to Doug Wilson through classical Christian education. They will be handed it because he's written some resources specifically surrounding, you know, educational methodology that aren't his theological framework. So a lot of times people bump up against him that way. You can find schools where people are all in and they are fans of Doug Wilson's work. And you can also find corners of classical Christian education where people would not be friendly toward him, but you don't really know. So it is worth discovering that, finding that out. I would encourage anyone to kind of pull on those threads and see because he has a lot of influence in those
So
circles.
let's think about this for a minute.
Mm.
This classical idea.
Yeah.
Who's classical? What does that mean, classical?
Yeah. So they're usually referring back to classical pedagogy. I think Doug Wilson wrote the book called The Lost Tools of Learning. They're looking back to Dorothy Sayers, who talked about classical stages of learning. So looking back to Greco-Roman ideals.
Well, that's a jump. So Dorothy Sayers is in England, and all of a sudden you're in Greco-Roman.
Right. So Dorothy Sayers kind of said, was making observations in her moment of how education has changed and said let's go back to these traditional ways where we had kind of concrete teaching, concrete ideas in the early stages, and then abstract thinking and kind of different stages of learning, different ideas about what's presented. And some of that includes, let's study the myths, the Greek and Roman myths. Let's study history. Let's study things that sometimes are ingredients of liberal arts education.
So
right?
now you got your THM in theology. I have one too, and then did some other studies. We were in Strasbourg, France, and we got a lot of experience with that. Seems to me that one of the problems in the early church fathers was that they brought in not only the Hebrew and Greek scripture, but they brought in the Greek philosophers who were terrible in their theology. They were, they were hierarchical. They were anti women. They just biologically they didn't understand who a woman was and why her body functioned the way it did, and they said terrible things.
Yeah, there's some deep misogyny in the writings of some of the early fathers. Yeah.
So one of the things Joy and I are interested in is what we call the Eden schoolhouse, where we say we're going to work with the kids and we're going to base the schoolhouse experience on the wonderful positive insights of Eden from Genesis 2 and 3. And we steered away from anything classical like that because there's the negative stuff that's brought in.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much to talk about there.
Yeah. Well, you can see why it would go hand in hand, right? Like Doug Wilson's deeply patriarchal, and he's a dominionist. So he believes in this idea of take dominion according to patriarchy, really. And that shows up in his educational materials and certainly in his parenting resources. So what happens, though, is ordinary people who might not even know who he is are interested in classical Christian education for whatever reason. They maybe pick up some of those resources, go to a co-op, find an online community, whatever it may be, and then they discover, oh, this person has written a lot. This is a name that's passed around a lot. And then they're kind of on the road here to reading, and he has produced a lot, and his adult daughter has produced a lot of Christian parenting material, streaming and in book form. They have a publishing house. And then they are in this dominionist idea of family life teaching, which I think is exactly as you've described, this kind of general complementarianism, but taken to its extremes, to its patriarchal extremes. And it's incredibly destructive. Right? It does not take much connecting the dots to see how it enables all manner of harm because of its dehumanizing attitudes toward women and children and to its unchecked authority given toward men. It's deeply problematic. It's deeply flawed. And I think it ensnares a lot of people, particularly, I don't want to speak to who it kind of ensnares. I think it ends up ensnaring a lot of people. And
so in your surveys, when you talk to people, they gave you some specific real life stories of how that was
absolutely harmful. Yeah, heartbreaking stories.
Wow.
Many parents who hold deep regrets or angry that they were served up these ideas and they trusted them. They don't get those years back, right? Like these ideas have consequences, a lot of grief. Many children recounting egregious stories of abuse.
There's
absolutely.
There's a 3-day co-op that's 2 years old now, and we were getting to know the leaders, wonderful people. And they said that our first year we used the what's his name? Doug Wilson stuff.
Oh, okay.
And then they didn't like it. We don't like this.
Yeah,
and so
good for them.
So then they said we're shifting and we're going to go with Charlotte Mason. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So you smiled when I said Charlotte Mason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're getting into homeschooling stuff, but yeah, I like Charlotte Mason's ideas a lot. She's a famous British educator who really valued the autonomy and personhood of children. It's reflected in her methodology. Yeah.
So this 3-day co-op shifted. They threw the Doug Wilson stuff overboard, and now they're working with the Charlotte Mason stuff. So that's safe.
I mean, always have critical thinking, right? Like we always should be evaluating as Christians, we should be saying, does this line up with the life and teaching of Jesus? That should be our lens, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's always pros and cons with any of it, right? But I think some of it is clearly, at this point, it's not theoretical. You can see the destructive fruit. You can see the problems in the methodology. You can see the like lust for power and empire show up in that corner of the dominionist circles of theology. But it's people like that, people like Doug Wilson in the age of the internet have incredible influence, because even though he might be pastoring a relatively small church in a relatively small community, he is producing a lot and is good marketing and is capturing a lot of Gen Z through slick marketing campaigns, through steady streaming content. So people are in these echo chambers. I mean, such that CNN is taking notice, right? Like there's some reach there that I think moves some of these people out of what we'd like to think of as like fringe communities. And I think Bill Gothard's a good example of this. Like, I think for many years it was easy to write him off as fringe, but he impacted millions of families. He had ecumenical reach because of family life teaching, right? So it crosses denominational lines in many, many respects.
So in our episodes of the Eden podcast, we've had two ladies who were called Jane Doe number 3 and Jane Doe number 4, and they went to trial against Gothard, talking about his abuse of them. We've also had a number of families from the Montana area who've talked about their specific experiences with Doug Wilson and his difficulties. So this is not our main influence or our main theme, but it is. We want to warn people: look out and stay away from that. And the balance, the way to balance that off is to, hey, look at the joyful news out of the Garden of Eden. Look at the joyful news out of Ephesians 5 and 1 Timothy. Yeah. Well, we're gonna bring it to a close here at this point, and I want to encourage people to. This is not an official endorsement, but let's ask you again: what's the name of your book, and what's the myths you're warning us about?
Yes, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families. And we are tracing the history and development of popular Christian parenting teaching. We're looking at some of the recurring ingredients there, including instant obedience, the normalization of corporal punishment, views on sin and hierarchy in the home. And we're discussing the impact and considering how did this impact families, with the goal of empowering families to, as we discussed in this episode, think critically, compare everything with the truth of Scripture, to consider the fruit in the lives of the people who are offering different teaching. So we really hope it will free some people up.
Thank you so much, Marissa. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
True 316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to true316.com/partner. True 316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new true partner who gives to the True 316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our True School workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the True 316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our true partners. Please join now by going to true316.com/partner.